So, where have we landed after the first two sessions? Well, I hope that you're beginning to see rest differently than you did before you started the class. It's some of the same vocabulary, right? We're using the same vocabulary. Hopefully we're beginning to think in terms of different definitions for that vocabulary. So how would we define rest? This is where we should be coming out of these first two sessions that we've had. We should have an idea of rest as not being disengagement, right? Without obstacles, but it's first pictured in Genesis as God's full engagement, right? God's active rule over an ordered creation. And he's the supreme ruler. He's given everything a place to be, and everything has a thing to do, okay? Including us as humanity. That's the way it's been defined. Humanity also, if we go back to that original state of God ruling, humanity was at rest with God in the garden, right? Adam and Eve had a place to be and a thing to do, and they were experiencing God's rest along with him as they acknowledged him as their ruler. But at some point that changed, right? And how did that change? Fundamentally, how did that change for Adam and Eve? They ended up listening to someone other than the rightful ruler for direction on where to be and what to do. I mean, this is simple terms, but that's what happened. You know the story. And when that happened, humanity's rest ended as they exited the Garden of Eden. And it became an existence of work. We're still trying to do what we're supposed to be doing, but we're doing it with another commander under sin. You might also be coming out of the first couple weeks with thinking about the reminders of rest. Remember reminders of rest from the last session? You might be thinking about those differently, at least I hope you are. The church historically has thought about the different segments of the reminders out of the Old Testament as kind of segmented. So not a continuum like I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that we see them all as a growing theology of what rest is, a picture of rest. And what are some of those? Well, again, we said manna in the wilderness is kind of where this picture started. We like to view that as its own episode. And then we get to the mountain and we get the fourth commandment, and we like to see the fourth commandment as a standalone, right? And then we're not quite sure what to do with some of the other stuff, like the festivals. Some people choose to maybe go back and observe some of the festivals, and some like to understand what they are, but they don't observe them. It's a standalone, and largely in our discussions. Sabbatical year and the year of Jubilee. Even the land of Israel, we're not quite sure what to do with it. We like to think of it as a standalone. We like to separate all these things. What I'm encouraging you to do is to see that they are presented in the Bible, in the Old Testament, because the rest that was originally set up had been disrupted. And God said, I'm going to create a reminder, a built-in reminder to my creation that this isn't the way it's supposed to be. And so he took a people group, he gave them a place to be, and he gave them a thing to do. What was their thing to do? To live in covenant relationship. And that was a set of rules that they were expected to follow. How'd that go? Not well. I want to tie something together for you that I didn't last week or last session as well. Leviticus 28, verses 8 through 10. It's the year of Jubilee. This is the culmination of this Sabbath or this rest idea coming out of the Old Testament, these reminders. And it was every 50th year there was supposed to be a special reminder. Every generation is supposed to get a new reminder. And what happens? Well, we talked about the year of Jubilee being this release of captives, right? Oftentimes financial debt is the captivity that they find themselves in. If life got in the way and you had to sell your land goes back to the people it was originally given to, right? We like to say it's original owners, but the text actually says, who's the owner of the land? God says it's my land. which is interesting. Because originally, when God sent them into the land, it's his land, which is a microcosm of the creation, right? It's his land, and he told people where to go and jobs to do. And so every 50 years, we're supposed to get this reset button. Everything goes back to the way it was when they moved into the land. What's this a picture of? What's it a reminder of, this reset button? It's not a reminder of 50 years ago. It's intended to be a reminder of Eden. And there's a point in here that I didn't make last week. You are to, verse 8, Leviticus 25, verse 8. You are also to count off 7 Sabbath of years, talking about how we figure out the year of Jubilee, 7 times 7 years, so that you have the time of the 7 Sabbath years, namely 49 years, and then in that 50th year, verse 9, you shall then sound a ram's horn abroad on the 10th day of the 7th month. Why is that important? I've highlighted it. It's the Day of Atonement. It's on the Day of Atonement that the reset button for the year of Jubilee is to take place. What else is happening on the Day of Atonement? Those of you that know your festivals. Well, there's one picture that happens on the Day of Atonement that's a reminder of right relationship with God. There were two goats. One was slaughtered, but the other one was called the scapegoat, is how we call it in English. And the priests would lay their hands, symbolizing the transfer of the people's sin into the goat itself. It becomes this carrier for sin. And then what did they do with that goat? They sent it out to the wilderness, never to be seen again. Now, sometimes it would wander back into camp. So they ended up actually shoving it off a cliff and killing it. But the original picture is, because that just ruins the picture when all your sins start walking back into town. But the original picture is this. Every 50th year. Now that Day of Atonement happened every year. Okay? This picture of the sins being taken away. Right? By the way, who in the New Testament takes away the sins? Yeah, a fulfillment of this goat, this picture. The goat walks out of town, and in the same day that the nation's sins are atoned for, everything resets back to the way it was. It's a once every 50-year picture reminder of what it was like in Eden, when there was no sin, when everybody had their place to be and their thing to do, and nobody was in debt, and there was no poor, and there was no rich. Everybody was just doing what they were supposed to be doing, right? So I hope coming out of this first 2 sessions, you're starting to see that as more of a continuum than a bunch of standalones that we can deal with individually, because that's what we've done with them in the church. And yet, even with all that, here's where we started. If Joshua had given them rest, God, through David's Psalm 95, would not have spoken of another day after that. There's this expectation coming out of the Old Testament that we should have, reading that story, that even the reminders of rest aren't a complete thing in and of themselves. They leave us wanting something more. If they're correctly understood, we correctly understand that we're not supposed to be looking at the reminders and being satisfied with the reminders themselves. We're supposed to be looking at the reminders and be thinking of a state that existed before, that has been lost, that will be restored. This is the promise. Okay? So, we do come out of this Old Testament world, and we acknowledge the rest at the beginning, but we're not satisfied with the reminders of that rest. We're looking for true rest to be restored.